Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a topic today based on source material that you, our listener, provided.
That's right.
And today we're looking at a pretty significant player in the U.S. financial world, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. You probably know it as FINRA.
Yeah, and understanding FINRA is really quite key. It sort of pulls back the curtain on how investor protection and, market integrity are actually maintained in the U.S. securities markets. It's a really foundational piece.
Absolutely. And our source material for this deep dive comes from FinCrime Intelligence. It's a platform really focused on, tackling financial crime.
Mm.
So our mission today, let's try and cut through some of the jargon, extract the key from this text, what FINRA actually is, why it's important, and crucially, how it connects to financial crime compliance. Ready to get into it?
Let's dive in.
Okay, so the source kicks things off just defining the name Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and right away it calls FINRA a self-regulatory organization, an SRO, here in the U.S. What does that actually mean, though, in practice?
Well, this structure is pretty unique. An SRO like FINRA, it is responsible for regulating a specific industry. In this case, we're talking the securities industry, so broker-dealers, the firms, and their registered representatives.
Okay.
But, and this is the important part, it operates under the, let's say, direct supervision of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
Ah, okay. So it's not a government agency itself, like the SEC is.
Exactly right. It's not part of the federal bureaucracy in that direct way.
Mm.
However, the source is really clear that it does wield significant authority. It can enforce federal securities laws.
Okay.
And it develops and enforces its own set of rules that all its member firms have to follow. So you get this interesting mix, this blend of industry self-policing, but with, government oversight. It's a key feature of the U.S. system.
That structure actually makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. So, okay, what's the main goal then? What's FINRA's core mission, according to the source?
Well, the core goals are pretty clear, and they're vital. Things like protecting investors, maintaining market integrity,
Right.
and making sure capital markets are fair and efficient. And think about why this matters to you, the listener. I mean, whether you invest directly or maybe through a 401k or something.
Yeah.
FINRA's work is aimed squarely at ensuring those markets are trustworthy, that there's a level playing field.
It really boils down to trust in the system, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, so how does FINRA actually do that? How does it achieve that mission?
The source breaks down several key functions. Let's unpack those. First one mentioned is licensing and registration.
Right. This is basically the gatekeeping part. FINRA runs the qualification exams. The source mentions the Series 7, Series 63, those kinds of tests that financial professionals have to pass to get licensed and registered before they can sell securities to the public.
Yeah.
It's about making sure they meet, certain minimum standards of competency. Almost like needing a license before you can drive a car on public roads. But this is for handling potentially large sums of people's money.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah.
Okay, what about keeping an eye on the actual trading, the market itself?
Right. That falls under surveillance and enforcement. FINRA uses some pretty sophisticated tech and analytics to monitor trading activity across the markets it oversees.
Looking for what, specifically?
Well, the source gives examples like insider trading, different types of fraud, misrepresentation, brokers maybe not disclosing risks properly. If they see weird patterns or maybe they get tips, they'll investigate.
Okay, so they set the rules, watch for rule breakers, and they also do rulemaking itself.
Exactly. They're constantly developing new rules, updating existing ones that govern how these broker-dealers and their employees operate.
And these rules align with the SEC's rules.
Often, yes. They complement or sometimes go into more detail than the SEC regulations. And the source points out this is an ongoing process. The market changes, new risks emerge, so the rules have to adapt too.
Right, makes sense. And they don't just watch from afar, right? The source mentions examinations and audits.
Yes, absolutely crucial. FINRA actually sends teams of examiners into member firms to conduct routine inspections. It's not just about reacting when something bad happens.
Proactive.
It's proactive, checking if firms have the right systems, the right controls, the right procedures in place to comply with all the rules, and that includes the financial crime-related ones we'll get to.
Got it. And the last function listed is investor protection and education.
Yeah, and a really key part of this is providing resources directly to you, the public. The source highlights Broker Check.
Ah, yes, Broker Check. I've heard of that.
It's a tool anyone can use. You can look up individual brokers, brokerage firms, see their licenses, their work history, and critically, any disciplinary actions taken against them.
And that directly empowers you, the listener, to do some homework before you decide who to trust with your investments. Puts the info right in your hands.
Precisely. It's about transparency.
Okay, so that paints a pretty clear picture of FINRA's main jobs. Now, let's make that connection, the specific link to financial crime, which is a big focus of our source material here.
Right.
The text says, look, FINRA isn't just an anti-money laundering body, an AML body,
Correct.
but it plays a really significant role in overseeing how the firms it regulates, the broker-dealers, handle their financial crime compliance.
Yeah, and this is where it gets very interesting, especially for compliance folks working in securities firms. The source points right to FINRA Rule 3310.
Rule 3310.
Well, this is the rule.
Okay.
It specifically requires every single FINRA member firm to set up and maintain a written AML program, an anti-money laundering program.
Written program.
And that program, crucially, has to be reasonably designed to make sure the firm complies with the Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA, and all the related regulations.
So Rule 3310 is like the regulatory hook. It connects FINRA's oversight directly to a firm's legal duty under the BSA to fight financial crime.
That's exactly it.
And the source goes into what FINRA expects to see in these AML programs, right? What are those key pieces?
Yeah, it lists several core requirements or expectations. First, firms have to conduct customer due diligence, CDD, and also ongoing monitoring.
Okay, break down CDD for us in this context. What does that really involve?
Well, basically, it's about verifying who your customers are, understanding why they've opened the account, what they plan to do with it, and assessing the potential financial crime risks they might present. And it's not just a one-time thing. You have to keep monitoring their activity over time.
Gotcha. And they also have to report anything suspicious.
Yes, absolutely critical. They are required to file suspicious activity reports, SARs, with FinCEN, that's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, whenever they spot transactions or activities that seem, potentially dodgy or illicit.
And these SARs feed into law enforcement intelligence.
But precisely. They're a vital source of information.
Okay, what else? The source mentioned internal controls and training, too.
Correct. Firms need to have internal controls suited to their specific business, designed to, prevent and detect money laundering. They also have to appoint a qualified AML compliance officer, someone responsible for the program, and provide regular AML training to the right employees.
So these are really the nuts and bolts of an effective compliance program.
They really are. And, as the source implies, these aren't just box-ticking exercises. They are effectively the front lines. These are the defenses that broker-dealers put in place to stop money laundering, terrorist financing, other illicit funds from flowing through the securities markets.
Right. So the stakes are high. What happens then if a firm doesn't meet these expectations? Maybe they violate FINRA's general rules, or maybe they specifically mess up on their financial crime compliance. The source talks about FINRA's disciplinary power.
Yeah, and FINRA definitely has teeth. They can levy some pretty hefty fines against both firms and individuals. They can suspend people from working in the industry, or suspend firms from certain activities. And in the really serious cases, they can actually expel firms or individuals completely, basically kick them out of the industry.
That's serious.
It is. And the source notes they publish these disciplinary actions. That adds transparency, but it also acts as a pretty strong deterrent, a public warning.
And if we look at the common types of enforcement actions, the source lists, what kind of behavior tends to get firms and individuals into the most trouble?
Well, several things pop up frequently. You see actions related to direct investor harm, things like misrepresenting investment risks, recommending investments that just aren't suitable for a client situation, or unauthorized trading, sometimes called churning, where a broker just trades excessively in an account to rack up commissions.
Okay, those sound like core investor protection violations.
They are, absolutely. But, and this is really significant for our conversation, you also commonly see enforcement actions for things like failure to supervise staff properly.
Yeah.
Directly relevant here, AML program deficiencies, or failing to file those crucial SARs.
Okay. So that really shows that FINRA isn't just focused on, say, market manipulation or bad sales practices. They're also actively enforcing the integrity of firms' internal controlled and compliance programs, including the AML part.
Exactly. The enforcement actions really reflect their priorities, and AML compliance is clearly one of them.
That's a really useful connection to make. Now, the source also emphasizes that FINRA isn't doing all this in a vacuum, right? They collaborate.
Oh, definitely not in a vacuum. I mean, regulating finance and fighting financial crime, it has to be collaborative.
Mm.
The source specifically mentions FINRA works closely with other big federal players, the
Mm.
SEC, of course, but also the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, and FinCEN.
Okay.
And they also coordinate with state-level securities regulators. Plus, they participate in international discussions, too.
Hmm.
So if you connect this to the bigger picture, it just underscores that this is a complex, multi-agency, even multinational effort. No single regulator sees everything, so that coordination is absolutely essential.
Right. So let's try and bring this all together then. Based on the source, what's the main takeaway? Why is FINRA so important?
Well, pulling it all together from the source, FINRA's oversight is, you could say, indispensable for a healthy, trustworthy securities market in the U.S. It's fundamentally about protecting investors, ensuring fair play,
Hmm.
and having mechanisms to actually penalize misconduct when it happens. And for the firms, the broker-dealers operating in this space, staying on top of FINRA's rules, especially that Rule 3310 and the AML requirements, well, it's not just about dodging fines. It's really fundamental to how they operate, their reputation, and frankly, their role as gatekeepers against dirty money.
So we've really unpacked FINRA today from its unique SRO structure and its core jobs right through to that specific, very critical role it plays in overseeing financial crime compliance in the securities world, all drawn from that FinCrime intelligence source material.
Yeah, and understanding how bodies like FINRA work, it really gives you insight into the layers of protection, the layers of vigilance that are needed to keep financial markets safe. The source also touches briefly on how financial crime itself keeps changing. It mentions things like cyber threats, AI, social media fraud becoming bigger concerns.
Right, the landscape is always shifting.
Exactly. And that raises, I think, a really interesting question for you to think about. Given how dynamic financial crime is, especially with all these new technologies popping up, how do you think regulators like FINRA will need to keep adapting? What changes might they need to make to their rules, their surveillance, their expectations in the years ahead?
Hmm. That is a fascinating thought to chew on, especially as these threats keep evolving. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.